so client-first APIs with mock data, Retrofit and Swagger. That's a rough title, right? That's a nightmare. Who here understands, like, clearly what all that means together? Raise your hand. Don't be shy. We got, what? All right, it's not that many people. All right, so I get it. This is on me. This isn't your fault. Yeah, that's a terrible title, and I instantly regret giving that to Eric, but I mean, you know, whatever. So let's talk about that title. So when I say client first, I mean app first. We're app developers here, most of us, some of us, and I'm talking about developing in the app. I'm not talking about you have an existing backend, or if you do, there's loose requirements. I mean, if you do have requirements, like it's mockups or storyboards, and the mock data part of that is actually hard-coded Json. So again, title's not so great, not really a mock object. Retrofit is a REST HTTP library. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar. Looking for nods. Yeah, we got some people that are Retrofit fans here. And it's by Square, of course. And Swagger is the world's most popular API platform. There's other platforms out there that you might have used. Apiary? Any Apiary fans in the house? No? None? Well, they just got bought by Oracle yesterday, so maybe you want to stay away from them anyway, because that's kind of a nightmare. I assume. I mean, it's not going to be great, presumably. So that's the title explained. I feel like that's not a great title, but what can you do, right? So who is this talk for? This talk, it's not super technical. This talk is more about, it's more for an independent app developer, which I feel is maybe a dying breed, or it's tough to be an independent app developer these days. It's also for people that are part of small teams. If you're part of a small team, you might not have the luxury of being able to have all these crazy back-end specs. And if you're part of a small team or you're an independent app developer, you just might have smaller clients that don't understand specs. You can give a small client tons of specs. They don't know what software is. You know, like if you're an independent app developer, every single party you go to, somebody finds out and then they're like, oh, I have a great idea for an app, right? If you're an independent app developer, sometimes you listen to those because like that could be business for you, right? But most of the time it's a waste. Don't listen to those people. So small teams, independent app developers. But I know a lot of you guys work for like the man, you know, these big bloated public sector. No, but you work for like bigger companies. There's some Shopify guys in here, right? There's like at least a couple. So you work for these big, bloated, huge. Now I've actually heard so many good things about Shopify. I don't know why I'm immediately saying terrible things. Completely unfounded. Anyway, but if you work for a bigger company, this could still apply to you. Because we've all, well, maybe we've all, but I've certainly dealt with bad project managers. And if you have a bad project manager, scope can kind of go out the window sometimes. You know those PMs that don't protect their developers? Seriously, it's the 21st century PMs? Like, get it together, you know? Don't roll over on your devs. A lot of devs aren't so good at dealing with the client. So it could be for you, too. It's for you. That's the point. Hopefully, this talk is for anybody using REST, even in the 21st century, if you're still using REST. Maybe it's for you. So this is more for like a fully spec'd out project. What can go wrong with that? A lot of the times, even a fully spec'd out project can run into issues, right? I mean, we've all dealt with scope creep and feature creep and that kind of thing. This first one here, requirement specs predate. So I've worked on projects where we spec'd everything out and then the designer got involved and they had direct access to the client and people were signing off on stuff without the developer's involvement at all. And that can change scope. Maybe I'm like making this up and you guys have never dealt with this and I've just dealt with all these horrible scenarios. Hopefully some of you have dealt with these also, but I've had that happen where all of a sudden scope has changed because of something a designer did. And listen, I love designers, they're the best, but it can happen, right? The existing backend, so if you're already dealing with an API and your app adds new scope or your app adds new functionality that the backend doesn't have. And of course, any backend change, if you're relying on it in your app, can become a blocker. And no one likes blockers. So, so who here is familiar with XDA developers? More people than that understood my talk's title. Okay. So the people that aren't familiar with XDA, XDA is the world's largest Android enthusiast website. It's a forum. There are literally thousands of apps. There are thousands of ROMs, which is like custom Android firmware. There's all sorts of hacks. A lot of the features that you enjoy and love in your phone right now are the result of custom ROMs on XDA. At some point, they were integrated, and then I'm not saying that Google ripped them off or whatever, but they're in ROMs now. I don't know what else. I don't know how to explain it, but XDA does a lot of that kind of thing. And I'm not going to go on and on about XDA, but if you ever wanted to root your phone, do it. Do it right now, because it's not as hard as you think. You're not going to brick your device. Those days are more or less over. More or less. Don't hold me liable for anything if you brick your phone. So anyway, XDA contacted me a couple of years ago, and they were like, we want to make an app store. And again, there's like thousands of apps on XDA. But the idea of making an app store is a little daunting, right? I mean, there's a lot that can go wrong. Also, third-party app stores. How many of you use Amazon's app store on a daily basis? Yeah, right. Daily basis?
I have apps that I download from there. I don't go on it daily, but I use.
Do you work for Amazon? I know you don't, but maybe in their payroll. So, all right. Well, the point is, though, third-party app stores, it's tough, right? You got to sideload onto your phone. You have to like literally disable a security setting and then install an app. And then you have a store that has questionable. Anyway, I won't get into the security of it, but they wanted me to do a store, and they already had requirements for this store laid out. They'd been planning it for years at that point, and there were all these requirement documents already laid out, and I kind of cobbled together what would become, you know, what they actually used. We started working on it, and we decided that even like we do the back end first. We knew that there was a lot going on, but there was other integration points at the back end. We wanted to make sure that the specs were solid and that we could develop an app around it. So we started with the back end first. Very small team doing this. And what ended up happening was XDA is like a reflection of the community. So like a new version of Android comes out, and all of a sudden things go crazy. Like all these new hacks and mods and root methods, all these things come out. Scope was changing just based on those types of things. So as we're developing this app, scope is changing. There's blockers in the back end. And the lessons learned from that were maybe not rely on the back end so much as what we did. And I'm not saying just to have like one production back end. We had our dev servers, we had our staging and everything, and it's still, we had blockers. It wasn't great. So, who here has this poster in their office? No one. All right, well you can buy this poster online. It's an Android Foundry poster. I think it's like 20 bucks. And it's got, I think, like an evil Andy with his arm around a regular Andy, implying he wants to kill him. I don't really understand, but the idea is that feature creep's not great, right? But it'll literally kill you, I guess. So, yeah, feature creep kills. So that's just the kind of, and oh, ironically, XE actually has this in their office, framed on the wall. So, there you go. So starting over. So fast forward a couple of years. The store is out, by the way. You can go Google it, do whatever you're gonna do, and it's doing really well despite my comments like that. But fast forward a couple of years, and XDA was like, all right, we want to start on something new. Do you have any ideas? And I was like, well, I always have ideas. That's my secret. And they asked me what I was thinking of, and I started putting together kind of an idea for an app or a platform or whatever, right? So a few things. There was no back end. With this app store, we'd integrate to all these different points. It was, there was a lot of integration points. It was this huge forum with like 8 million users. We had all these integration points. This new app, there was no requirements. I didn't have to do anything. I could do whatever I wanted. It was just me. It was the smallest of the teams. That's not true. There are back-end guys at XDA, but they're so busy running this site that getting their resources is really tough. So again, that's another point to having something that's hopefully independent of the back-end. And the last point, no software integration. So I didn't have to integrate it into anything. I could just do whatever I wanted to do. So this, I feel like, this is kind of the dream, right? Like being an independent app developer and having a company say like, hey, we'll fund you to do whatever you want. Just pitch it to us. And that's what I did. I pitched it to them. So I put together a one-pager. I put together with my business case and everything. And this was the mock-up I used. for my one pager, and like it's not great, right? It's there are apps that let you draw in like websites and with tools that draw straight lines, but there's also websites that let you print out a piece of paper and write on it, and of course, you know. So yeah, so this is the idea for this app. I will say though that because I've been working with XDA for so long, they were very cool. Like they understand me. When I give them something like this, they don't hang up the phone, right? They're like, okay, we'll figure it out. And again, this was backed with documentation. I won't show the documentation, but imagine it was amazing, because I'm sure it was. So this shows like a feed on the first phone, and then the second one's like a details thing, and the third one's another just, like I didn't even storyboard the full thing. I took like a couple elements of the app, and I was like, there you go. And they were cool with it. They were like, yeah, they signed off on it. They're like, well, yeah, this is the future, let's do this. So let's talk about this first slide. Again, bringing attention to it. Also, there's like grid dots, and it's not even close to being straight. It's really terrible. Anyway, so we got an image, we got a title, we got like a couple toggles, we got a type of card. The first one up there is a wallpaper. Then we got a thread and a news article. Pretty easy to understand, right? So here's the thing. If you're making an API in general, you're probably using Retrofit. Does anybody here do REST APIs without Retrofit? One person? Adam, really?
Yeah.
What do you use?
Just use OkHttp.
You just use OkHttp?
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody here use Retrofit and not use OkHttp?
Wow.
Really? Wow, that's great. Go OkHttp then. Wow, that's amazing. So okay, so there's so OkHttp and Retrofit are often used together, clearly, and the whole thing is that you don't have to use Retrofit with OkHttp. You can just use it using the default kind of Apache libs that I think are all deprecated, or close to, or not great, or whatever. Not really looked well upon. But there is a difference between the two. So I'm going to let this obscure screenshot I found of a Google Plus post from 4 years ago by Jake Wharton do the talking for me. So this gentleman asks, what is the difference between OkHttp and Retrofit? Does Retrofit using OkHttp for HTTP requests? And Jake says, OkHttp is purely an HTTP client. Retrofit is a high-level REST abstraction on top. You can certainly use OkHttp with Retrofit, but you can use it without. To which this guy responded, okay, but how? Retrofit handles all HTTP stuff. How tell him to use OkHttp? And then Jake says, just put it on your class path. So the idea is that if you just have it in your requirements, Retrofit will use OkHttp. And the reason I'm mentioning all this OkHttp stuff, even though I didn't even mention it in my title, which I definitely should have, but didn't, again, another point about a terrible title, was that we're going to be using something with OkHttp to make all this happen. So I'm going to reiterate, because I feel like I've lost my train of thought here. But the whole point of this talk is about this idea that we're going to be using hard-coded JSON assets in our app instead of network requests. So we're not going to deal with a backend. We don't necessarily even have an API. Probably don't have an API. We're just going to be using OkHttp with Retrofit, and then we're going to be creating an interceptor that will, as the definition says, a powerful mechanism that can monitor, rewrite, and retry calls. So here's our Pojo. Everybody's familiar with this. You all clearly run, except for you, Adam. All run Retrofit. You're all familiar with this. It's very simple, right? You saw my simple mock-up. You know how simple it is. We don't have a lot here. There's, you got your timestamp, your title, your ID, your type, and your image. Before I kind of go on further, I'm going to say that it's not best practices to have one image URL in your app. There's all types of things to deal with network latency and connectivity and all kinds of stuff where you should be doing different types of network requests. Just thought there's going to be a lot of you'll look at this and go is that best practices? It's best practices at heart. And that's important. I'll realize it, but I won't say it because I'm implicitly, you guys know. Even if you don't, you know. So we got our Pojo. We got our endpoint interface, which returns our list, our observable list of our list item objects. And then here's the interceptor. So this Let me try to scroll. This is our interceptor. This is the biggest code example in the entire presentation, by the way. Again, not a technical presentation. But the whole point is that you should look into this little guy, right? Where it gets the file name off of the request. If we go down to that method, we can see here where it's getting a string version of the requested method. So if you're doing a get request to /list, that's going to be get. And you'll see here where it replaces forward slashes with underscores. So if you're doing a get request /list, it'll be get underscore list is your JSON file or your resource file. The rest is pretty self-explanatory. I'm not even going to go into it. That's how arrogant I am right now. But you guys all get it, right? Everybody kind of like, I'm not getting super into depth of what's happening here, but you can see that it's creating the response in the intercept. Maybe I should explain it more. It's creating the response here. You can see where it creates the body based on the byte array, and it creates our little JSON response based on the resource, right? Everybody gets it? Pretty simple. And this is my dependency injection. So again, I'm not even going to go into Dagger2 or anything. But the idea is that we're generating an interface for our list API there. And it's instantiating Retrofit, which is instantiating an OkHttp client, which, if you look right there, if the build type is debug, it adds this interceptor there. And that was just my personal choice for this. You could add all types of conditions to add your interceptor if you wanted. Right here, it's if your build's a debug build, there you go, it gets included. And again, Retrofit instantiates OkHttp, which is including your interceptor. I feel like that's pretty clear, right? All right, here's your JSON, right? So in this scenario, I'm manually creating my JSON. I'll address that later. But I needed to for this because the client was like, they wanted to see their own assets. They wanted to see their own titles, their articles, all their stuff, right? Like, if you're delivering a prototype of something, you want to include their assets. Maybe you don't. Maybe it's who knows. But in this scenario, I included my own assets. You can see me hard coding in CDN URLs and everything, and gibberish text. It's great, right? Looks amazing. So again, I'm going to reiterate over all this, although I feel like I completely underestimated you guys. OkHttp client is instantiated with the mock interceptor, which looks up raw JSON files instead of network requests. And Retrofit is instantiated with that OkHttp client. Pretty simple. Here's that beautiful mockup again. So we went from that. There's that mockup, right? And this is the actual app, although I don't know if it'll run because I'm tethering. Doesn't matter. Doesn't need to run. You get it, though. We got our title there. We got our date timestamp. We got our images. We got our icons. We got the type of card. And we got a dark theme, baby. I feel like so many app developers don't bake dark themes in their apps. You guys definitely need to start to. They're the best. I mean, I know they're not like really material design or whatever, but who cares, right? Who cares about Google? Look how good that looks okay. But like, look how good the dark part of it looks. The contrast, the darkness. Anyway, let's go on to Swagger. So, who here is familiar with Swagger? All right, look at you, goddamn progressive people with your Swagger. So Swagger is a full set of tools to design, build, and document RESTful APIs. No, I think they're moving to GraphQL. Ivan doesn't know. I don't think they are, actually. I just wanted to see if you try to claim ownership of everything with GraphQL. Swagger has 3 components. It's got an editor, it's got a codegen and a UI. It's open source under Apache 2. And this URL I have at the end here, this isn't anything to do with official Swagger, but I feel like it's kind of like a good bridge for beginners to understand. Oh no. All my images are broken. I'm tethering right now. The banks don't have Wi-Fi. Let me reload this. Oh, sweet! Look at that. That's the symbol of your data plan being consumed at a very rapid rate. All right, remember all these slides that we went through, guys? And now you got to see them again, except way quicker, so you won't, it doesn't matter. Let's hope the images load now. Yeah, all right, give it up for Kudo. It's pretty cheap, it's okay. Use Kudo, guys. So, we've taken our JSON object, we put it in this little toolbox, and it gives us like a very basic model output for Swagger. Swagger uses YAML or JSON, and if you're like me and you're a big Python fan, you'll use the YAML. And it's pretty basic, right? We got our fields, and there they are in YAML. Very simple. If you had a more complex, I mean, this whole talk would be different. Anyway, and here is the what I just showed you, except it's spec'd out a bit more in the Swagger editor. So anybody familiar with this? Dark themed Swagger, again, with the dark theme, it's very important, theme for this talk. But you can see here where you got required fields, your properties, and what happens is that, for people unfamiliar with Swagger, on the right side, as you're updating this, it's validating in real time, it's throwing you errors if there are any, and this actually lets you interact with it to some degree. You can expand some of these fields, like you see there's like a list item array there. You can expand that and then drill down to what exactly your fields are and that kind of thing. So hopefully pretty self-explanatory. But the idea is that we're taking this JSON object that we did ourselves, putting it into a little tool, and now we're creating an actual API spec based on this mock-up that we've been using. And this is the same shot as the left side there, except I've added a few things. So I added some parameters there that are part of the Swagger spec, or the open API spec. And there's a few things extra that you might notice. There's like an xFaker attribute on some of these. And what that does, anybody here familiar with faker.js? Wow, all right. So faker.js is like a node, it's a node library that generates fake data. And you can use it to generate fake JSON and all that kind of stuff. And there's a website out there called JSON Schema Faker. And what it lets you do is it lets you export your Swagger JSON with some of those extra xFaker fields, put them in here, and there you go. You can see, hopefully you guys can see, I don't know how great it looks from far away, but you can see that it outputs your array of objects there using the fake data that we've specified in our specification. So it's still Swagger compliant, and then look at that. You go into some website, and you don't even have to install anything. You go on a website. It's amazing, right? And this is like close-up of what it generated there. You can see the image URLs and all the things. So that was the first part of Swagger, the edit kind of box, Swagger editor. The second part is the code gen. So Swagger also comes with a set of tools that lets you generate source code based on your spec. So you can generate, well, I guess I'll run through this. So it lets you generate it through a command line tool on GitHub. There's all these instructions and everything you need. There's a web GUI baked directly into Swagger editor. And it supports 20 different server languages and 40 different clients. So that's substantial. And it's completely open source, so you could add whatever you wanted. If you're using Django instead of Flask or whatever and you want to do that, you totally can. It's all baked in, and this is a screenshot of the dropdown. So it's like right in your editor. Any one of these generates a zip file. You can unzip it, and there you go. You got clients, you got server stubs, you got whatever you need, right? And this is an example of using the command line interface here for the code gen to generate an SDK for Android. I know this is kind of backwards, right? Because like we started the app with this idea that like we created our JSON manually. And now I'm talking about generating JSON. So there's like so many ways to do this, right? I mean, you can design an API and roll it out first, or you can do the app first. And this, like, it really shows just kind of how the tools have progressed now, where, any way you want it, at any stage of the game, you can generate code and generate not only client code, but like server code with this kind of thing. And finally is the Swagger UI. So I guess I'll read it. It's Allows anyone, be it your development team or end consumers, to visualize, interact with the API's resources without having any of the implementation logic in place. It's automatically generated from your Swagger spec with the visual documentation, making it easy for backend implementation and client-side consumption. That's a pretty good sentence right there, or a paragraph, I guess, right? Oh, it's a huge, no, it's 2 sentences. But yeah, the idea is that with Swagger UI, you take your spec and it generates an interactive UI for it. So hopefully my tethering is up to snuff. All right. This is what it looks like. This is the literal spec I took from that app, put into Swagger's default UI. You can see all the endpoints here, and when you, and this is like, you know, it's just a nice little web interface that you can host yourself, or you can use Swagger's demo one and just put in your JSON. And when you click on an endpoint, you can see we got, you can drill down to the example model, the example value of your 200 response. You can actually show your model, the actual data model that it's returning. And you can actually like enter into these fields and actually simulate requests to this API. This is all just doing our spec in Swagger. And this is so, the app I'm working on, the backend's done in Django. And this is like really like three lines you have to add to your app. And what it does is I'm using with Django the Django REST framework, if any of you are familiar. And yeah, this is the like Django Swagger framework. I forget the name. It's in my slides. I'll link it later. But Django REST Swagger. It lets you put a few lines of code in, and what it does is it ties into Django REST framework and generates your Swagger UI for you. So this last screenshot I showed you, this is the from the spec I created in the beginning based on my JSON that I fleshed out, so on and so forth. And then we implement this into our backend. So at this point, our backend's done. Right? We've gone full circle. I didn't cover any of that. But the backend's done. It's totally done. And we've implemented this little Django REST Swagger thing here. And there you go. You get, it's like the same interface, except it's real data, although this is also still just dummy data because this is very new. But the idea is that you use this interface to literally query the API. And it creates a GUI wrapper around all your endpoints. And it's handy. It's really, really handy. So let's go back to this title and what we went over here. So we outlined the interceptor. Everybody remembers the interceptor? Remember how good that was? It was like, I didn't even make it, by the way. I got it on Gist. So full disclosure. But it was good. It worked. So we had our interceptor. And then we Retrofit's instantiated with an OkHttp client, which has the interceptor. We have our JSON files hard-coded in the app. And then we have our Swagger spec built from JSON, and outline the Swagger code gen to generate server stubs or clients. And finally, the Swagger UI built into your backend, coming full circle. There you go. And this is it in action. So this is like literally all done. This entire demo is done just using the dummy data. There's a few things I'll go over with it, but basically, one thing you'll notice if you're using these hard-coded resource files is there's no delay. It's like instant. And so if you want to like simulate network latency with RxJava, you can add delays to your stream. Like there's various ways to kind of simulate a network thing. I feel like that could be its own talk. But yeah, I mean, we went full on. We got a full app done. The images are still being pulled live from these various servers, but the actual API requests are all done using our interceptor with our JSON files. And that's it. Do you guys have any? Any questions?
I'm just curious, instead of the OkHttp interceptor, have you ever thought about using, say, the mock web server or something?
Absolutely. I've used mock web server in the past. So that's a good, I'll repeat that. So you asked if instead of using hard-coded JSON files, if I'd considered using mock web servers. And so I've looked at that. There's a ton of them. There really is. There's a ton of these mock web servers out there that do everything. They do like a lot of this kind of thing. I looked into that, and I've done that before. I wanted it self-contained because I wanted to be able to like quickly roll out different builds using these different like asset files in the actual app to get feedback and everything. But what you said is a very good point where you know, in this scenario, it's like an Android app. It's super self-contained. It's just for that. But like, what if you had a couple clients? What if you had a couple apps on different platforms? That would be a really good use case to use a mock API. So basically what it does is it's just a web service that just gives you back the JSON. There's no logic behind it. It's all hard-coded kind of thing, I assume is what you mean.
Yeah, so I think OkHttp itself has a mock web server. I guess it's more for testing. So you can also have static JSON data in there. But I'm just trying to see, I'm just curious like whether that's something that can be used in this case.
Absolutely.
I guess, like,
There's so...
I guess if you wanted to emulate like HTTP errors or error states.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's one thing. Like, I've had to do all my errors kind of manually using RxJava and everything. So what you're saying is a good point. Dealing with errors is definitely, like, if you use these mock servers, that's a huge advantage there. There's so many different ways of presenting JSON, I feel like. You know, like, there's so many ways to do it now. It's like, it's overwhelming. Everybody's come with a different solution in every language. But I think that's good, right? There's so many choices. It's great. This was just, I mean, this literally is just an example of what I literally did last week. Like, this is very new to me. Not new to me. Like, I'm familiar with all these things, but this is just like what I did, and it worked really well. And I thought, hey, maybe there's a few people that would consider it and at least show off Swagger, because at the end of the day, no matter how you deal with your API, and I haven't even gotten a test or anything, but like how you deal with your API, like having specs laid out should be mandatory, but somehow isn't. There's so many APIs I've dealt with that just like, you know, you never know. So this lets you have like an enterprise level API spec'd out. Bless you. Anyone else have a question? Oh, all right. No, go ahead. No, it's totally fine.
Just wondering, for the API stuff generated by Swagger, does it actually generate the Django application front end?
It depends on the server. It's not like a full application, though. It's just like a stub of what you need. Like that's kind of a tricky point, though. Like I didn't, so I implemented a full backend using Django, and I didn't use the code gen. I found that like just having the spec laid out, like it took like a full day to do everything. You know, I mean, this is a very simple example too, but the idea is that like when you have everything laid out to that degree, I think like the code generally shines when, say you have an API, and other people want to create clients for it, or you know, like I think it really shines with public APIs. In my opinion, and that was my first. I'm sure a lot of people have that, where like that Explorer that you saw there with all those endpoints laid out, and you click on them. Like I've seen those on so many websites, and I used Apiary for some reason anyway. But yeah, like Swagger's good. And obviously there's so many people using it right now, right? There's like millions and millions of users. Think we're good? All right, guys. Thanks.
Thanks.